The movie opens up in a supermarket store where we see a Russian guy shopping for food. He is on the phone with his wife, trying to pick the exact can of chicken meat she likes, but it's obvious he is having difficulties finding the right flavor she wants. While he inspects the ingredients of the paste in the can, a guy comes to the shelf and rudely starts to pick his preferences. The guy on the phone doesn't say anything to him except to give him a bombastic side-eye. Later, the conversation with his wife turns, and she starts to argue with him. He complains that the things she wants are expensive, but she says if it weren't for the PlayStation he had bought, they would have saved a lot of money. He tells her that he had planned to buy it for a long time, and that the trip he had just come back from was regarding business, not for relaxation. The chat starts to heat up, so the guy just hangs up the phone. At the cashier, while he lines up with others to pay, the guy who stepped on his way earlier takes his time counting pennies. He looks homeless and rather unsettling as we see the customers behind him starting to get tired of him. The cashier tells him the price comes to 100, but he only gives her 99 and 50. He says it's nearly 100 and tells her to call it a deal. But she tells him to pay the remaining 50 and not delay her any longer. The homeless guy calls her a monster and tells her that a man's destiny is in her hands. He then turns his attention to the people lined up behind him and asks them to fill in the remaining 50 he lacks. He preaches that they live together on Earth and that the Lord God sends these trials of life for them to overcome shoulder to shoulder. He tells them to think about how they are all preparing themselves for doomsday and what they will say about this dishonorable deed. Now that the people are tired, one of them even leaves the line. The Russian guy feels weird, and the homeless man asks him if he has problems giving away 10 rubles. He looks well dressed and heavy with chips, so he isn't grudging over 10 rubles, right? The woman, however, feels bad and hands him the rubles he is missing, and he thanks her, telling her that the angels will take this into account when her soul stands before God. This deed may outweigh and save her from eternal punishment in the nethermost fire. She says it's no matter, but the homeless guy just takes out money from his pocket and pays for his bill, returning the woman's ruble. However, he leaves another 10 rubles on the counter, telling the well-dressed guy he will need it. He leaves, and then the older woman is served. When it was the guy's turn to approach the cashier, as told, he couldn't find a change in his wallet. He needed exactly 10 rubles, and he surprisingly picked up the coin and paid his bill. Outside, the guy continues his phone call with his wife, explaining that his last trip was all about business and that he only cares about their relationship. Once he finally finishes putting his bags into the car, he spots the homeless man once again sitting alone. He gets into his car to get some change and heads to him. When the homeless guy sees him, he gets up to fight him, but the charming man just tells him he is here to return the favor. He says he doesn't need his rubles and returns the coin. The homeless guy mocks him, telling him if he now knows he doesn't want to burn in the nethermost fire. The charming man doesn't believe that hellfire even exists, but he thanks the guy for his concerns. The homeless guy then asks if he also doesn't believe in our Lord Jesus Christ. He says no and starts to walk towards his car, but the homeless guy is already hooked up and follows the man to ask him what he believes in then. He tells him facts are his standard, but also states he doesn't have time for this stuff. He also doesn't see any point in arguing overviews since they are strangers and probably won't see each other again. He also adds if the homeless guy is a believer and feels better in the world of fictional characters and faith in the world beyond, he is welcome and he doesn't mind. The homeless guy then asks him if his purpose is to feed worms after he dies, if that is the pinnacle event of his life. The charming man then tells him he must not misunderstand. He is a mathematician and believes in exact sciences. Being eaten by worms may not be the pinnacle event of his life, but it is its imminent end. The homeless guy then asks what his purpose is, and the charming guy says life itself. To live is to fulfill that pinnacle event. But the homeless guy asks if he lives to end up as food for worms, then he already is food for worms. He is simply not ripe yet. He makes his point and brings up more existential questions to the mind of the charming guy, so he just leaves him standing there. Just then, the charming guy asks the homeless man what his reason is to live. Backing up, the homeless man tells him he dreams of becoming food for the worms, but it seems the place is already occupied by him. He smiles, but then sits on the edge of the road as he did before. The charming guy approaches him and tells him it doesn't take an expert to laugh off a serious matter, but his views are based on scientific facts, unlike the homeless man's air-built fairy tales. He then firmly asks him if he at least has some unbeatable and important evidence that his fairy tale about God is justified. The homeless man then answers yes, he has unbeatable evidence, and in fact, he will call it a fact to please him. Interested, the charming guy asks him to reveal it to him. However, the homeless man tells him he has already told him once, but it never affected or made a change in him to believe in God. Confused, the charming guy tells him that he wasn't told anything, and as far as he remembers, he had never believed in God ever in his life. The homeless guy answers that he used to believe in God, and to his information, the two met millions of times before. Now the charming guy is very confused, but it's clear to him when the homeless guy refers to Homo sapiens when he says you. But before he tries to understand further, the weird homeless guy gets up to leave, claiming he is tired anyway. The charming guy then says to him as a form of mocking to take a rest on his way back. But this only enrages and angers the homeless guy, who turns back and hangs the charming guy by his collar. He confronts him, asking how he knows when it will be a way back for him. He then breaks down and starts to cry, which is completely odd for the charming guy. He looks around, wondering what triggered him, and tells him he didn't mean any harm. The homeless guy then replies, asking which way he meant it then. He then says he has been waiting for it for so many years, his way back. He doesn't explain anything yet, but the charming guy's words seem to penetrate him to his bones. The charming guy then says he didn't say anything wrong, and that he definitely won't remember it after a couple of years. However, this also makes him cry harder, and it makes the charming guy sit next to him for comfort. He then speaks nice words to the homeless guy, telling him he is young and has his entire life ahead of him. He shouldn't be sad like this and all. Meanwhile, his phone rings and it is his wife who is waiting for her groceries to come home. The charming guy picks up and tells her he will call her back later, but the conversation leads to an argument once again. He tells her he will be home whenever and that he doesn't need her help for now, except to wait for him with patience. He hangs up the phone and turns to the guy to continue their chat. Now the homeless guy is upright and is reading a newspaper. He says there is no point in staying upset, and the charming man adds that he'd better think about the future as well. The homeless guy asks which future he is talking about, and the charming man tells him his whole life is before him. He says that sadness only worsens his real future, and whatever his burden was in the past must be forgotten so that he can build his future. He tells a bunch of things that a New Age influencer would say, and the homeless guy only replies with a funny statement. He says he once heard if you want to make God laugh, tell him all your plans for tomorrow. He makes his point to the charming man, who now becomes more interested. The charming guy then asks what the unbeatable evidence of God's existence was that he had claimed a while before. The homeless guy doesn't have any reason not to share it, so he firmly tells him the evidence is that he has met God, our Lord Jesus Christ. The charming guy laughs and hopes it could have been in a dream, but the homeless man tells him he is the eternal Jew. The Jew that did not let Jesus take a breath when he carried his cross. He didn't let him rest when he carried his cross by his house. Guards convoyed him and he told him that Jesus shouldn't stop there and that he would rest on his way back. Jesus said he would do that, but the homeless guy had to wait for him there. The charming guy then smiles and asks to confirm if this happened 2,000 years ago. The homeless man understands that this may sound somewhat strange to him. At first, it was strange for him too, but then he got used to it. Thus, the existence of God, at least Jesus Christ, is a fact for him. At least the existence of him 2,000 years ago is certainly a fact. The charming man is interested in what the homeless guy claims to have experienced, but admits it's incredible. The homeless guy then says there are no contradictions in his words. They aren't fantasies of a crazy old fart. Now the charming man, having trouble taking him for his words, decides to leave this chat. He goes towards his car and drives off, but backs up at the last minute and asks the guy how many fingers he had bent behind him. Confused, the homeless guy tells him how he would know. The charming man confronts him, saying that being different from other people, he should know what people couldn't know. The homeless Jew then says he claims to have seen Jesus, not predicted finger bending. Understanding his foolishness, the charming man comes out of the car to once again continue the chat. The Jew told him he didn't keep a patch of Jesus's clothes, and even if he did, it wouldn't prove any of what he was saying was true. He then asks the charming man what evidence would convince him about his story. Perhaps an object or a stone from under his cross, the charming man says, but the Jew can't offer him that evidence since he has only seen Jesus for a minute or two. The man then asks questions about what Jesus looked like 2,000 years ago, and the Jew tells him 2 hands and 2 legs, pretty much a regular person, except that he was tortured. He says he doesn't remember his face as time went on, and he forgot. However, he details the interaction he had with Jesus. The guards convoyed him by the house of the homeless. He stopped to catch his breath, but the guy didn't let him lean upon his house. The reason was that the Jews were pious people, and Jesus claimed to be the Son of God, which they considered blasphemous and outrageous. The charming guy then asks if he just drove the Messiah off from his yard, and the homeless Jew confirms it. He didn't want Jesus to lean upon his house in his time of need. Once again, the charming guy claims that the story is made up, so he begins asking how much money the homeless man wants. The homeless guy gets ready to set up a price, but assures him he will only lie about this truth if the charming man wants it to be a lie. Charming then asks if the Jew now feels ashamed of not letting God lean upon his house to rest, and the homeless man says yes. He even tried to redeem his acts by becoming a priest in the past 100 years for the past 2,000 years, but nobody came down from heaven to pat his shoulders and write it as an act of grace. 100 years, but never a sign or hint from God. The charming guy says it may have been a divine disposal for him to go on serving and believing. But the homeless Jew is confused, as he previously was firm in denying the existence of God. He said of any people, he shouldn't be the one to persuade him into going to church. For now, he doesn't know what God has planned for him, or if he hasn't heard him when he spoke. The Jew is pretty much hopeless and is tired of living on Earth, being the immortal man he is. The charming guy asks him what his occupation was for all these years he has lived on Earth, but the homeless person only says it's not as much fun as seen in the movies, because in reality, you have to seek food and dwelling. Also, his life has no other purpose than to wait for Jesus' arrival, for the second coming of Christ or doomsday. He has nothing to do, but the charming guy sees his eternity as a form of luck. He says he can do anything in life since he is immortal and still can get away with it. However, the Jew isn't interested in anything and tells the guy he doesn't have fewer fears than an average person, because if his fingers are cut, he will still have to live with 4 fingers until doomsday. The charming guy keeps asking more questions about ways out of life that could end the homeless man's troubles. But the Jew reveals even if a tank or a shooter stands before him, they always change their minds and the gun fails to fire. He doesn't know why he can't be killed. He tried to hang himself, thinking he could end it in the beginning, but he only hung for 2 weeks on a tree branch, having a terrible throat ache. Then the branch broke. Later in 1945, he was captured by the Nazis. He was scared and tried to shoot himself. However, the bullet exploded in the barrel and broke it. His hands were all cut by splinters. He still has the scars on his hand and chin, but everything healed bit by bit, even his ligaments. The charming man is listening closely and is mesmerized by the story. The homeless Jew then tells him he moved to Russia 40 years ago, crossing from Poland. Now, as he told him before, the charming man hands him some money to support his struggles, but he is immersed. He still insists it's a made-up story, just like any beggar would make up losing his children in war. But the Jew tells him he didn't beg him for anything, he simply shared. The charming guy then claims he could be schizophrenic and should consider the possibility of his mind going crazy. The Jew insists he wishes that was the case, but it's true, years and decades passed and he would never change and nothing would change. Here he shows the charming man some of the scars that he made throughout the years. It was a form of attempt to kill himself, but it's also a mark of the year he attempted it. He thought he could be crazy, maybe he had scratched them yesterday and made the dates look like hundreds of years had passed, but the scars remain 100 years after 100 years. He then insists on charming him to help to figure it out, like by stabbing him with a knife, but the guy refuses. He didn't want to explain to the police that he saw a man claiming to have seen Jesus, and stabbed him to make sure. The homeless man shrugged, saying that's just how it works, whether he gets it or not. They walked across the parking lot, and Charming asked him to tell something from history, like what was happening in the 1st century. The homeless Jew answered that it was pretty much the same. Shepherds took care of sheep, and fishermen caught fish. The guy pressed on, asking about big events like Jesus appearing, church changes, or any mysteries. The homeless man, puzzled, asked how he knew all this. Charming said he learned it from books. The homeless guy got confused and said he didn't remember much. To tease him, he asked him if he could remember where he was in August 2000. He explained that over the years he just lived, moving to different countries. All he needed was a warm place and some bread. People didn't pay much attention to him being eternally young, and he didn't stay in one place for long. Charming then asked if he knew any old languages people used to speak. The Jew said he knew several, including Aramaic, his native one, but now they are all considered dead, and who could check upon them? The conversation moved to talking about aliens and spaceships. The homeless man said he had seen many strange things, but hadn't met any aliens yet. The big question was, would it be wise to think there are no forms of life out there with all the world? Charming then said it was too deep for a homeless man to have a profound understanding like this. After that, the homeless man left, and the guy locked his car and followed him, wanting to know more about his adventures. He asked why Jesus punished him, making him wait for him until doomsday. Wasn't Jesus supposed to forgive everyone, including his enemies? The homeless man said it wasn't Jesus who punished him, it was he who cursed himself with his own words, and Jesus just made his wish come true with his divine spark. The worst part wasn't waiting for thousands of years for him, but staying the same, like a simple shepherd, not living a rich spiritual life. Charming couldn't believe it and insisted he thought that living so long would make the man know much more. Surely, he met great people like Michelangelo or Nietzsche. To this, the homeless man replied, "How can one know and understand what people will say about someone after they die, whether they were referred to as a genius or stupid?" Charming then inquired how people lived, what they thought, and what they believed 1,000 years ago. The homeless man responded that people then thought the earth was flat and believed God sat above the clouds, observing their every action. But, Charming countered, if God views everything through our eyes, doesn't that make him merely an observer? How can he judge us? The homeless man explained, "It means that God is concerned with our actions to the extent that we are. If God resides in everyone, then so does the devil." Charming, with a hint of irony, remarked that those were some profound thoughts for someone claiming to be 2,000 years old. The homeless man smiled and said, "People always have a choice. Fate exists, but we can alter our fate by making different decisions." Charming then questioned why people still fight over their beliefs even today. The homeless man answered, people should keep their religious opinions to themselves. Everyone finds something sacred that gives their life meaning, but when they start comparing and thinking their beliefs are superior, it leads to conflict. Charming's wife called again. He apologized and said he wasn't done yet, because he had met an intriguing person. She said she would come over to see it herself. Returning to the homeless man, Charming asked why he was homeless if he was so intelligent, and why he didn't change his situation. The homeless man replied that he was living as if preparing for a big exam, postponing any changes he should make in his life. Charming admitted he lived similarly, but avoided thoughts of death because he was still young. The homeless man reassured him, saying that time flies. Regardless of our actions, middle age and old age come, and deep down, every elderly person feels like a child. Charming didn't want to dwell on aging and death, thinking people invented religion to believe in an afterlife. Charming then doubted the homeless man had lived for 2,000 years. Though not seeming crazy, perhaps he had unique genetics, and maybe medicine could be made from his special blood. He asked if the man had done anything notable, like hiding Jews during World War II or something. The homeless man laughed, revealing he was a Jew himself. A Polish family had hidden him, but they were eventually discovered and taken prisoner. That was when he tried to end his own life. Charming remarked that times were tough then. The homeless man disagreed, saying times are always the same. Astonished, Charming thought everything had changed from the Middle Ages to now the modern days. But the homeless man explained that everything changes if you notice daily changes, like a river that flows similarly as it did 100 years ago. Growing more curious, Charming asked about the paradox of faith. He said, could God create a stone he couldn't lift? The homeless man said it was a paradox of the mind itself. If one were a scientific atheist, they'd agree that all knowledge comes through the senses, and the idea of God exists in the mind. Thus, in one's mind, God cannot create a stone he cannot lift. Charming was perplexed, but the homeless man advised him not to overthink, but instead to worry about more important things. Charming sighed, expressing a desire for answers. The homeless man shared that he, too, wanted answers about our purpose in life, what happens after death, and what one needs to achieve in life. He asked Charming what he would do if he lived for 1,000 years. Charming pondered and realized he would simply live. The homeless man said that initially he was joyful, but then he wondered how to find purpose as an immortal. If humans are God's creations, there must be a reason. The homeless man agreed, but admitted he didn't know the purpose and hadn't met anyone who felt truly fulfilled. Even historical figures like Hitler, despite their impact, didn't realize their true selves and often became villains. Charming then asked how one could reach heaven if there was a devil inside them, lingering for the rest of their lives. The homeless man explained that all human emotions stem from fear. The part of us that lives in fear endures eternal torment, while the part that embodies love reaches heaven. To attain heaven, one must always choose the love within themselves, every time. Charming then asked him if he was God. At this point, he felt he had been taken too far, and thought that God himself had sent this man to make him a believer. The homeless man laughed, saying he was human but carried a bit of God, a bit of love like everyone else. He believed there must be a purpose for the eternal life he had been given. He also referenced Plato's idea that people, like horses, are embodiments of an eternal idea. Horses come and go, but all that is left is the title itself. Just then, Charming's phone beeped. His wife was approaching his car and he rushed towards her. He introduced the homeless man to her, telling her that he had seen the Jesus she believed in all her life, but she thought he was joking and got upset with him for being late. While they argued, the homeless man's lookalike came to the parking lot and shouted at him that he had been searching for him for an hour. The homeless man left with his twin, and it seemed the man employed him for some job. Bewildered, Charming watched them go. His wife also thought he was mad and drove away. While he stood there, he saw her turn into the homeless guy as well. Still confused, Charming went to his car. When he looked in the mirror, he was confronted by the same eyes of the homeless man, depicting that, after all, we are all the same humans who don't serve extraordinary purposes other than waiting for doomsday on Earth. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our recap. Like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.